Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is episode 66 for December 2016. I am Quinn Dunkey, your co-host of the first. With me as always is co-host the second, Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, Quinn. Christmas is almost here.
It is, and or whatever other holidays you might celebrate, I guess.
That's true, yes. The holidays are here. How's that?
Yeah, I got my Festivus poll up, and it's ready for the airing of grievances.
Oh, good. I'm sure this is the perfect forum for that.
Yes. Well, that would be our email. That's where people air their grievances.
Right. Here's everything that was wrong with your last show.
That's right. Here's all the stuff you're wrong about, and you don't know.
Right. So you got any Apple II presents that you hope to get this year?
No. Other than the gift of time, I would like to have time to work on side projects and things. So hopefully that will happen.
Well, that's actually a pretty important one, but I don't know that anyone can actually put time in a box and hand it to you and say Merry Christmas.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap because people always know what it is. Yeah,
and then they try to take it. Yes.
Yeah. The box collapses into the singularity, and then you're like, "Oh, you gave me time. Oh, well, thanks, but not really a surprise, I guess."
Yeah.
Hey, this is John Romero, and you're listening to Open Apple.
Okay, well, I guess we should just jump right into it, yeah?
Yeah, we have a very cool guest on the show today.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk to Glenda Adams, a.k.a. the Atoms. She was an Apple II cracker from way back when, and what's really cool about this for me is that we've recently had someone on the show who may or may not have been involved in a whole lot of software cracking that's up on the Internet Archive and things like that. But that's all been really recent. I don't think we've talked to anyone who did this back in the day who actually had a crack screen handle and was in a group. And so this is kind of exciting.
Yeah, in fact, we've been looking for one, and I think a lot of people have always been curious about who a lot of those crackers were behind the aliases on the splash screens. So welcome to the show, Glenda.
Hi there. It's nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. We always like to start out and ask the simple question first. When was the first time you got your hands on an Apple II? Do you remember what that was like?
Oh yeah. So I was probably in junior high, and it was probably 1979 or 80. I got an Apple IIe. They had just come out, and I remember a couple of the other people that I knew in the computer club or at school. It was a 2 Plus. Sorry, it was a 2 Plus. The 2 Plus had just come out, and at that point they're like, "Oh, don't get it. Just get a regular 2. Don't get the 2 Plus because you can just get some memory and do the same stuff because they were new and all that." But so I got a 2 Plus and used that to kind of learn to program and hack around a little bit. And basically, I was quite the nerd at that age, and as most of us were probably. And so I remember I had that original 2 Plus which served me quite well for many years. Eventually, I think I actually probably did replace it with a 2E, and I kind of hung on and got a 2GS right before I finally switched over to the Mac for good after that. But the Apple II, especially those early 2 Plus, was kind of the computer I kind of cut my teeth on, I guess you could say. I learned AppleSoft at first, basic, and then I taught myself assembly language, and kind of it all went from there.
So you dove right into the hard stuff, the programming, the good stuff.
Yeah. My father was a programmer, and so I think that's probably one of the reasons I got a computer at a young age, and especially back then, and so I was always kind of around it a bit and thought it was cool, and found I had a bit of a knack for it, so that was good. It was something that kept me busy. So,
do you remember any of the first programs that you wrote?
Yeah, I'm sure the first few things I played around with a lot of graphics stuff. Did those original little high-res graphics kind of demos and stuff like drawing like string art and things like that. I did do a few I was worked on a text adventure game when the Infocom games were out, and I was working on my own little game with a friend of mine in high school, I guess. For it seemed like a couple years. I mean, maybe it wasn't that long. Maybe it was a couple summers. But we never actually got any. I mean, we did a lot of work on it, but we never actually got it to the state of showing it to anybody or selling it or anything like that. But it was kind of a fun little project where we just worked on and off and wrote a little text parser and the story and a bunch of stuff. It was probably pretty hackneyed at the time as we were teenagers. I didn't know any better, but it had some silly jokes and stuff like that. So that was probably the first thing I could remember writing, that was a big program. That was something more than just type. I remember getting the Apple II magazines and some computer magazines, and typing in sample code or little sample, type in games and programs like that. That was part of the way I learned to program before I kind of went on to writing my own stuff.
Quinn, I think you said, what was it last time? Writing 90% of the program is really easy, and it's the last 10% that's hard. Something like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us at that age started a lot of games. I certainly did. I have boxes of floppies full of games that are 30 to 60% done. Right about where it stops getting fun. Weirdly, I would get another idea. It's funny how that works.
That's exactly the same. I can feel the same. There was lots of half incomplete, oh, this is cool, let's do this, and then you get a little ways into it, and then something else shiny comes along and distracts you, or like you say, it gets hard, and you get to the really tough implementation details, and you're just like, oh, geez, I don't know if I really want to stick with this. So it was hard to get something into what we consider a shippable state now that after I became an actual paid software engineer.
I always would get to some point where I'd have some really bad bug and I would get frustrated and sort of give up. And usually the bug was just because I didn't really know anything about computer science or software engineering. So I had built the whole system in a terrible way. And then it just gets to a point where it just collapses under its own weight and you can't really continue.
Yeah, I definitely can feel that. I've been there before.
So Glenda, how then did you make that transition from programming into cracking?
Well, it was kind of a natural evolution. I mean, part of it was, you're tinkering around and you're writing code and stuff. And then I played lots of games. We were obviously, as teenagers, everybody was kind of trading games and looking, watching what's the new stuff coming out in the magazines and things like that. And you didn't have enough money to buy, 100 Apple II games a year or whatever. So everybody was kind of just copying and trading things around. And one of the things was I realized, kind of a little bit how things were working copy protection that wise, and I started learning assembly language 6502. You kind of just started looking at the games in terms of how do they work? Kind of trace through the code. I mean, the nice thing about the good thing about assembly language is all the code's right there. There's not anything really hidden because you're at such a low level, so you can just start walking through the code and see what it does. And so that'd be kind of a natural challenge, I guess, to say, can I make this? Can I break this game? Can I crack it and make it? Can I make it actually work without the copy protection? And so I kind of fell into that and probably just tried, messing around with a few little simple games. And at that time, there was the Apple II scene was kind of interesting. It was all, BBSs and modems and ASCII Express and DFX and all the transfer programs and, people making handles and making little groups and all these little pirate groups that, kind of fought between each other for stupid random reasons, that kids will do. And everybody was trying to get their game out first, or their crack out first, or their crack was better than somebody else's. And so, it was probably fed a good teenage ego at the time to try to get into that kind of scene. So I was pretty active with that. I ran a BBS and it's funny because now as I was thinking about all of this, because it's been a fair number of years. It was either called the Thieves' Den or there was another name I can remember. My friend ran a BBS, I ran a BBS, and I always get which one was which, was confused. and so we ran that with little forums and message bases and things like that. And so I was kind of in that kind of group in that scene, and then all the rest of all the other kind of crackers and wares people and that were kind of spread around the U.S. and even some outside the country. And so you chatted with people over modems. You talked on the phone a lot. I was on the phone a lot as a teenager, I guess. And so kind of got into that bit of the world. And really mostly, self-taught myself, how to crack things. I was not the most accomplished at the time, but I think, looking back and seeing the crack screens, there's a Twitter handle that's patented and been tweeting out old Apple II crack screens lately, and that's what kind of caught my eye.
Yeah, that's how we found you.
Yeah, because I saw my name, I was like, oh my goodness, I'd forgotten about. And it's funny because I can remember 2 or 3 games that I remember doing, but then there was one that this was like Winnie the Pooh Adventures that somebody popped up and was like, I don't even remember doing that, but I obviously must have. And so there were kind of some of the secondary lesser games that I did. I wasn't. There was lots of big names back then, like Mr. Crackman and the Triton and Black Bag and all these groups and things like that. So there were lots of kind of famous pirates and crackers too. And I was a bit at least on the periphery there and had done my part, I guess, to preserving some of those games at the time. Maybe I don't know if you could call it preserving it when it was in the middle of the original publishing cycle.
So we should say you went under the name The Atom. Do you remember the first thing that you cracked that had a splash screen with that name on it?
Boy, I'm trying to remember. The handle certainly came up earlier when just you needed a name to post on the BBSs and things like that, and I thought it was a clever play on my last name. So, and also I kind of liked the cracked by the atom that was kind of a funny play on words too. So there was a lot of bad puns and that in people's handles back then, I remember. I can't remember what the first one would have been. It could have been, for all I know, it could have been Winnie the Pooh Adventure. There was another adventure game, kind of a 2D side scroller adventure called Below the Root. I remember it was actually kind of a difficult one. I cracked that. A couple others, but yeah, it's been too many years for me to remember what the very first one. It's too bad. I should have taken some notes or something.
And you said you're entirely self-taught. There was, you could log on to BBSs and find there were cracking guides, and there was Computist magazine that showed you how to crack programs. But if you did that by yourself, that sounds like that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, and part of it was certainly, there certainly were kind of source materials I used. You had the 6502 assembly manual, which was, came with the computer, I think, or I bought it at the bookstore. I'm sure I had read some of the, there was all the how to crack files. I think I actually have to look on the text files site, because I actually wrote a how to crack something. I remember writing a couple of those little articles later in my tenure as that, and so I'm sure I read some of those kind of things too, and got some tips and tricks from that. So it was kind of a mixture of kind of just getting the manual and pouring through the code and looking at different programs and bits you gleaned from talking to other people and other people that did stuff. So it was kind of interesting. One of the interesting things I definitely remember is a lot of times you wouldn't actually you might not be able to get a hold of the disc or the game that you were trying to crack at the time, because somebody's got it and he's in Chicago and I'm in Texas. And I remember I'd get on the phone and you'd walk him through talking, okay, do this, tell me what it says, what's next. And that was a really long and laborious process to actually try to crack something doing that, because a lot of times the guy that was on the other end of the phone wasn't a programmer or wasn't quite as savvy about it. And so trying to just do it all basically audio over the phone was kind of a trick. It was much better if you could get a hold of one of the originals yourself, and then so you could actually just work on it straight on your computer. I think I only successfully was able to crack something over the phone maybe once or twice, because it was a lot. That was a hard process.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting. That's like
It was. It's a good thing as a kid you just had a lot of free time, I guess, and didn't really care.
Yeah, it's like tech support for your grandparents, but times 1,000.
Yeah, in assembly language. Yeah, so that's great.
So were you part of a group?
Yeah, so there was a couple different groups. There was the big groups like there was 1200 Club and oh goodness, I can't remember some of the others, but there was one called Black Bag that was a guy, I think in Chicago, and I think he was Mr. Doc, I think was the name of the thing, and he was actually like an optometrist. I think he was an older guy, wasn't a kid like all the rest of us, and we were briefly part of Black Bag for a while. There was some falling out at some point, and we either left in a huff or got kicked out or something. I don't remember which, but we worked with them for a little bit, and I remember I think we at least cracked one or two things under their name. I'd say there was a really good friend of mine at the time in high school, and his handle was One Eye, as like a one-eyed pirate. It's a lot of, if you look at any of the crack screens that have my name, a lot of them most usually were the Atom and One Eye, because we hung out all the time. And so he was in Black Bag too. We were in that for a while. I think once, then when we left, we started a group, just a few of us that were in Texas, called LSD, which actually stood for Lone Star Distributors. That was another cute little play on words, and we were thinking we were being really, really smart there. That it was funny that to have that name. And so there was a few LSD wares. Then I think we did something called 5-Star Elite, because everybody wanted to be elite, and so we just said we were 5-Star Elite. So there was a few different groups like that we kind of went in and out of over the years. I guess probably, I did that stuff probably from early '80s till I was in college in the mid '80s, and so probably it kind of wound down once I started college and that. So it probably was a span of 3 or 4 years at the time. So there was a lot of turnover, a lot of things that went on over those years.
So something I've always wondered is the splash screens that crackers would put in these games. Who made them, and how did you put them in there? Because usually the discs were full, the commercial ones were full.
Yeah, so it was always tricky to fit those in, and so we basically we would usually make them ourselves. Sometimes, like if you had a group like Black Bag or something like that, sometimes they'd have somebody who was a member of the group that was kind of a bit more graphically adept, or had the tools to kind of make you a high-res screen that you could put in. When Fontrix came out, that was like, oh my God, that was the best thing ever, because now you had all these fonts and you could just lay them out on the screen. And of course it exploded. If you look at those crack screens now, it makes your head explode, because there's so many. It's like, how many fonts can we use on one screen? All of them. Yeah. And so sometimes we had another friend that lived in Austin that went to another high school, but he was also on the BBSs, and we had him do one of the screens once. And it was funny because I think even we were like, oh, this is horrible, but we're like, well, we asked him to do it, so we should just put it in anyway. Because even then we had some taste. So yeah, it was interesting because a lot of times the discs were pretty full, and you really kind of had to intercept the boot routines and display your crack page before you kind of let flow go back onto the program. A lot of people end up doing a little bootloader, so basically there was something you'd replace those first couple tracks or sectors on the disc with something that would really, as tiny as it could be, would just load and display a high-res page, and then kind of load and jump back into the game. So that was always tricky, and you could kind of see some of the crack pages. Some of them are these great big, neat high-res graphic screens. Some of them it's just text, that's because it was obviously a lot smaller to just print some text to the screen. Or even in the case, I remember there was a couple where all you could do is kind of like they might have had some little loading text that came up, and you basically just went in and changed it, to fit in what amount of text you could in the 2 or 3 lines that were already there, so that you actually weren't adding any new data to the app. So that kind of became, that was always the kind of the last thing you did once you got it cracked and working. Then you definitely had to, because you had to take credit for it. That was such a big deal back then that you were the ones who did it, because generally whoever did the first crack, or the first crack that worked well, that one would be the one that got disseminated everywhere. Everybody would copy that. So if you got there first and you got your name on it, then everybody would know who you were, at least who your silly Apple II pirate handle was.
Yeah, that's funny. I bet you could deduce the date that Fontrix came out by when all of the crack screens exploded with
Oh yeah, definitely.
Gothic
That was
and everything
you could see
else.
that as soon as like all of a sudden there's like medieval fonts and all
Yeah.
this crazy stuff going all over everywhere. And I noticed some of the crack screens, they almost turned into they were like almost like diss albums and stuff. There was these little beefs and wars between the groups, and there'd be this game's cracked by them, and then like this other guy, he sucks or whatever, and things like that. So it turned into these things. So then the next the other group would crack something, and they would say something back, and so it'd be an interesting thing to go back and look at those maybe chronologically and by group and kind of see how that thing works. And also there was a lot of turnover. People were part of this group, and then they left, and they were part of another group, and so it was kind of an interesting sociology there, I guess.
I'm glad you mentioned that part about modifying the original splash screens, because I always kind of wondered how crackers decided when to do that. Sometimes they would make their own splash screen, and sometimes they would just add like cracked by so-and-so to the original game's splash screen. And that makes sense that it would save space to do that, because you wouldn't have to add it.
Yeah, it was really just a matter of how complex was the boot loading, and could you fit something in, or if there was just no room, if the game was so packed full on the disc, there was no way. Then a lot of people, you just end up like, okay, I'm just gonna see if we can stick our name somewhere in the corner here, because that's all we can really do.
So did you ever do one of the cracks where they would remove significant portions of the game, either to make space or just to turn it into a file crack or something like that?
I think I did a couple file cracks, but in those cases it was smaller games where you could fit them, because we really didn't, you wanted to have all the game there. You didn't want to ruin and take out pieces of it or parts that were actually used. So I don't remember doing anything where you actually took out something that was important. But there was definitely, at that point, if you had a game that really only took half a disc, well, if you could get it down to a file loader and a file crack, then now you could put it on a disc with another game or two, and that was pretty cool. So you definitely, that was a plus if you could figure out a way to do that. That was probably the earlier games. As it got, as the developers got more advanced and they were trying to cram as much content as they could onto discs and multiple discs, then things got filled up enough to where it was pretty tough to do a file crack on some of them. So that was definitely harder.
Yeah, you definitely saw that with the real early games where they loaded themselves completely into memory, and it seemed like there was a lot of people would just load the game and then save it to a file, and
that was the easiest. That was the easiest crack to start with. You'd have the and then at some point there were some of those. Some hardware things, a crack shot or snapshot, I can't remember which was a peripheral card you plugged in that would literally do that you would basically, it would dump all of memory out to a file that it could load back in later and basically set everything back up to exactly how it had been. And so you could do this kind of snapshot, crack shot, picture of memory for those games that didn't require disk access. And it was a quick and easy way to kind of do that. So that was kind of interesting.
One of the reasons I think that like today we have trouble finding people who want to talk to us about this is because the software companies at the time were so they'd invested a lot of time and energy in protecting these programs, and they tended to be litigious and come after especially kids like you were at the time. Were you ever worried about getting caught?
Oh yeah, you always were. It was kind of, it was one of the reasons when I got to college. Once I turned 18, I was like, okay, this is kind of stupid. I shouldn't be doing this. And plus, I went to college and got a computer science degree, and I became a software developer, and I could see it from the other side. Then it was less of a kind of harmless, just like this is fun. We're just copying games and that and more like, oh wow, this is like somebody's livelihood. And so I kind of grew through that and realized like this wasn't probably the best idea. And you certainly, you were always worried about that you were going to get, that somebody was going to catch you, or it was less, I don't remember as much about the software companies and that going after, they did have some people. I remember a few stories. More of it, there was, at that same time, there was a really big kind of subculture of phone phreaking, phone hacking, and kind of long distance calls and doing long distance calls for free and conference calls and stuff like that. That was the one that was much more likely. If you were heavy into that, you definitely heard of people that got in trouble and got arrested or got, called up in front of somebody, because that was certainly a lot easier to trace, and there was a lot more or police force, or I don't know what you call it. There was definitely more authoritarian kind of looking at that and that. So that seemed like that was probably more likely. But a lot of the people that were doing that, if you're calling some BBS in another state or whatever like that, and downloading some 140K game at 300 baud or 1,200 baud, you probably weren't paying for the phone call all the time. So,
but you didn't have like police show up at your door or anything like that.
Never had the police show up my door.
Okay.
I had one. There was the only time, and probably one of the time that maybe did also kind of get me out of the business, so to speak, or out of that kind of pastime. The Secret Service came over to my apartment when I was in college, which was interesting at the time. And I don't know if this is still a thing, but at the time it was the Secret Service that investigated basically like phone fraud. And phone hacking and stuff. And basically, at some point, I had been on. There was all these conference call systems back then, which was kind of a way where some of these groups would get together and you get 8 or 10 people on a line and basically just talk all night or whatever. And the people that were like really seriously into phone hacking knew how to basically hijack those conference calls. And at some point along the way, somebody from one of the little pirate groups that I was part of had called up on a conference call and called me, and I was on it with the friend or two, and didn't think anything much of it because I was like, well, I didn't start the call or do anything. It's just somebody called up, you chat for an hour and then hung up. But of course, all those records are in the files. So at some point, whoever they were going after, the person that had started this, because it must probably had started a bunch of conference calls and run up a big bill for some company somewhere. They decided to do their due diligence and basically go down and find out all the phone numbers that were on the call that people had called and go visit them. And so they showed up one day and sat down and talked to me for a half hour or something, basically. And I was like, yeah, all I know is these people's handles and, vaguely where they are, but don't really have any idea, who actually originated the call or really wasn't involved with any of that. But still put the fear of God in me at the time as a whatever I was a 17-year-old or 16-year-old or something. I must have been 17 probably because I just started college, I would guess. But yeah, so that was my one brush with it, and that was enough to say like, okay, that's probably let's do something that's a little more productive with our time here.
Yeah, that would certainly scare the heck out of me.
Yeah, it's too bad because I had one little bit of kind of nostalgia, and from that I had this little bitty book, little address book kind of thing that I had written all the names or all the the handles and phone numbers for people that I knew in the Apple II world at the time, and that you would call or chat with and that. And at some point I hid it in my apartment because I was worried that the Secret Service or whatever was coming or something, and I never found it. I moved a couple of years later, and I don't know where I hid it. It was like, oh, there were so many. Just as from a nostalgia standpoint, just for going back and remembering all the names. So it's kind of cool seeing all these crack screens on Twitter now because I'm like, oh, I do remember. It's like, oh, there's, the Triton or, people like that. Disc jockey, some of those guys that like, oh, I kind of remember that. That was somebody.
I imagine there are some people in that book that are very happy that you lost it.
Probably so. Who knows what that would mean for the, what use that would be at this point. But yeah, I evidently hit it. I hit it really well because I never did find it again. So maybe there was something I erased that from my own memory, so I wouldn't find it. So, but that was pretty funny. I think I had a little name. It was like, and they're so classic of there's kids and teenagers and stuff that do it. And like the thing I have written on the title page. It was the Adams Pirates I Know list.
There's a guy today, actually, he calls himself 4am, and he's been cracking software like crazy. And one of the great things about it is every now and then he'll stumble across one that's either really well protected or there'll be like hidden messages to the pirates from the company in the code. Did you ever come across anything like that?
I didn't. I don't know if I remember ever seeing something like that specifically in anyone's I cracked, but I definitely saw bits of it, because other crackers would, if they came across something, would post a picture or copy the text to put it on a BBS. So definitely saw some of those, and I've been watching. That was kind of where it led me back into all this. Is somebody retweeted 4am, and I been following him now for however long, 6 months or something, and watching and reading all those cracks, because it just brought so many memories back. And I was like, oh man! But the ones he's cracking, some of those, I'm like, read through his trace, and I'm like, oh my god, this is insane. There's no way I would have ever figured out this when I was doing these. I was way out of my league at that point. But that's pretty cool, yeah. And just to see the stuff that the hoops they were jumping through to do that protection code. And then, yeah, it is kind of funny to see the little bits of things that are in there, little notes to the pirates that say, please don't crack this, or, things like that. And of course, I saw some games that had, pretty insidious protections where it's, instead of just, they're just going to reboot or whatever, it's just going to hang, just silently set some flag, and then now, like, you can never win the game. You can't get past level 2, or, for some reason I think it was Prince of Persia, or maybe it was either Prince of Persia or Karateka, had something where there was like a jump that you just couldn't make the jump. If you jumped over this gorge, this chasm, you couldn't make it if it was a bad crack, if the crack hadn't worked, if they detected you'd done something, tampered with it, and you just couldn't quite figure out why. It was something like that. But yeah, there was a couple of those like that where you realize, like, oh, something's gone wrong, and the game isn't working.
So you said you had a 2GS then for a while. Did you ever do any cracking on the 2GS as well, or just the 8-bits?
No, by that time I had pretty much just gone on to doing software development. So I think the GS I got because I had a Mac at the time, and the early Mac, and I really loved doing programming on that, but there was no color. It was back just the original Mac, black and white. And when the GS came out with 256 colors, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so amazing, because I wanted to be a game programmer. So I got that and mostly just used it for just coding and playing games on it too, because I still played a lot of games at the time.
So do you remember what happened to your Apple IIs? Do you still have any of them, or?
So I have an Apple IIe actually that's here in my home office. It's not my original. At some point I sold my Apple II Plus and my IIe. Probably just sold them at a garage sale so I'd have money to buy a new computer, buy a Mac or something else. So those are long gone. But my dad actually, the local school, little place I went to in North Texas that I went to junior high at, probably, I don't know, it must have been 10 years ago, maybe. They had like a whole bunch of Apple IIes and original monitors and disk drives like sitting in storage still, and they were going to throw them out in the dumpster. And he actually saw it and remembered, that I'd had an Apple II, and so he like went and scavenged before they tossed them out and got me a complete working IIe disk drive and original Apple II color monitor, and boxed them all up and sent them to me out of the blue. So I was like, oh, this is so cool. Every once in a while I still turn it on just to hear the beep and play around, try to remember. The crazy thing for me was how much you could still remember of, like, oh, here's how you get in a monitor, and here's, different commands and stuff like that. It's like, wow, I hadn't done those for 30 years or something, and it's still stuck in my brain.
So that if that came from, you said it came from the junior highs that you attended, so has a pretty good chance of being in one that you actually used, right?
It could have been, yeah. It could have been one in the computer lab. It may have been, it seemed like, I'm trying to remember if we had much I don't know if we had any computers much in junior high. I think these might have been in the high school, and I didn't go to high school there. I moved before that, so they may or may not have been. But it's possible, because it was the same school, so it certainly could have been one that I did something with or played with at the time.
So over on Jason Scott's excellent textfiles.com, he's got a list of Apple II crack screens and screenshots of them. And what's great is he's got this nice laid out list where you can just search for, because it's like the title and then the names on the crack screen. And so I'm looking at some of yours, just searching on the page for the Atom, and it looks like Agent USA and...
Oh, I remember Agent USA, yeah.
Yeah. There's one here called Burger Time. that you cracked that said thanks to no one at the bottom?
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, that was something. I remember we were in some kind of snit with the other crackers or something. It was because there was always, that was a big thing, is like, you would put, cracked by whoever it was, and then you'd say thanks, and you'd thank, the guy that got you the original, or just other members of the group, or somebody who ran a local BBS or something like that. But at some point there, I think there was probably some little thanks war going on between, somebody didn't get included in the credits they wanted. And we were at that point, I kind of remember that we were in some kind of snit. We were like, oh, we're just not going to thank anybody, so thanks to no one for this.
Looks like as part of LSD, you cracked Hallie's project. And thanks to Dragon Lady, the Talisman, and the Hitman.
And it's funny too, because those are all just kids. Like the Hitman or the Talisman. I think it was a guy in New Jersey, and he was like, a 15-year-old kid going to high school, probably hanging out in his room, with it on BBSs on his Apple Cat modem.
Nothing but time on his hands during the summer to crack software.
Yeah, that's right. That's probably what we did most of the summer. That was probably, that was it.
One of these screens is actually, it looks like a member list for the club. You and One Eye are at the top, and then below that is Camel Jockey, the Fox, the Saint, the Bandito, and Mr. Xerox.
Yeah.
Do you remember any of those people?
I remember the Saint. We talked to him a good bit on and off. The funny thing is too, is partially it's just the length of time, but I don't even remember these people's real first names. And I'm sure we referred to each other as, like, I remember, like, there was the Cracksmith was Drew. For some reason I can remember his name was Drew, but that's about the only one I can remember that was yeah, I can. So it's funny at this point, like, it's all lost to the mists of time now that I can't remember. I think the guy that had the handle, which now is not terribly politically correct, Camel Jockey.
Yeah.
He was actually Middle Eastern, because I believe his name was Minaj, or it was something it was a Middle Eastern name. So I think he was certainly kind of playing on his own, kind of essence, for he wasn't a dig at anybody else, but at that time, you didn't think anything of it really at that. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I do remember, some of those names certainly ring a bell, and you almost remember. The funny thing too is the first memory that probably comes back with people is their area code, because that's where you kind of remembered, like, oh, he was from 212, or he was from 617, and you at that age or during that, because there was a lot of calling BBSs, and kind of you vaguely knew, like, Boston area code or LA area code or Philadelphia or something like that. So you remember whether somebody, what area code they were in. 415, they were out in San Francisco, or 617 was Boston. And so you kind of had all these little 3-digit area codes memorized. And that was as much what you remember who was from where as anything else.
Sounds like you guys had a lot of fun.
It was quite an interesting little few summers there, and yeah, through that it was a lot of and then on one hand, it was I learned a lot. I learned a lot of coding and from reading other people's code and kind of teaching myself like that. So that was pretty valuable. In other ways, it was, I think, just kind of classic teenage, just cliques and groups and drama about silly little manufactured things. I mean, basically no different than kids that were hanging out wherever else, if you were, doing some other activities. So, but it was kind of interesting in that it was a truly kind of very virtual kind of space to be in, because everybody really was pretty separated by fairly long distances. I remember there was maybe one time we actually went on a trip. We were in Austin, and we drove up to Dallas, and we met a couple other people up there, and just hung out and played games and something for a weekend or something like that. But generally, you never met any of these people in real life. You never knew what they looked like or anything really. It was just a name on a BBS.
So the few that you did meet, were they anything at all like you imagined them to be?
Probably not so much. I mean, in like any kind of online, meeting kind of thing, where you're the person you picture probably doesn't look anything like what they actually look like. So physically different like that, but then like personality and that, they were pretty much exactly like they were online. They were like, yep, that's just like you expected it to be. So in that sense, there probably wasn't too much of a surprise in terms of that.
I wondered if you're involved in any of the modern kind of retro computing stuff, the new hardware and the new get-togethers and that sort of thing.
I haven't really done any of that. I've kind of been tempted to kind of get back into it a little now, like seeing like all the stuff that that 4AM is doing, and some of all these little cracks. And I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit and dug around and looked at kind of some of the retro stuff and the Kansas Fest and some of those. And it would be kind of fun because that's I have pretty fond memories of all that time and that history. So I think I might. As I get a little free time, dig into that a little bit and go back and play with it a little bit, because it is kind of fun to go back and see some of those some of that tech from way back when things were so much simpler than they are now.
Well, you should definitely come to Kansas Fest.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Oh, I definitely will. I'll definitely look at that, because I think that would be kind of fun. There's a lot of folks from those age. I think I gradually. Kind of ask, kind of what I'm doing now or kind of where I went. I kind of moved into software development as I went into college, and that I became a game developer after I graduated. And I was actually there in Austin where Origin Systems was. So the first game I actually worked on was a game called Space Rogue.
Oh, I love Space Rogue. That's one of my favorite games.
Me too.
It was the most awesome game. So Paul Neurath, who wrote that originally for Origin, I worked with him when they had written that game and they were getting close to shipping. I don't think they had quite shipped it yet for the Apple II. And at that time, Origin was porting all their games, everything to Commodore 64, Mac, PC. There's that kind of crossover time when all those systems existed in the kind of mid 80s. And so I answered an ad in the newspaper for a little company in town that had basically gotten the contract with Origin to port Space Rogue to the IBM PC, the Mac, and the Amiga, and maybe I don't know if they did the C64 or not, but Atari ST. It was the Atari ST at the time. So actually, that was the first thing I did when I got out of college. I talked to Paul, I met him, and got these reams of 6502 assembly language that he had written Space Rogue on the Apple II in, and it was my job to port that to the IBM PC. That was the first thing I ever did. And so it was cool because at that time, it was like I had played all the Ultimas, and I'm a big gamer at the time, and so Origin was right there in Austin. They had moved there from somewhere else, and recently, and I got to go out to Origin's offices where they were working. And at the time, they were working on Wing Commander. And so I would go in, and I was going to the QA room or something, and I'd see them playing Wing Commander. I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever, because it would just look so amazing. So it was kind of cool. I was like inside the game business and inside the industry, and got to see sneak peeks of the games before they came out. And then I was getting to work with people that I had known or seen their names about. So that was, got to go out to Lord British's Garrett's July 4th party out at Britannia, Maine, or one of his original houses, stuff like that. So that was kind of my first job. Was I ported all that 6502 assembly over into mostly C, but also a little bit of assembly for the fast stuff. Did the IBM version, did the Macintosh version, which the IBM version was kind of like, I really didn't want to do that, but they were like, well, you have to if you want to do the Mac one, you have to do the IBM one. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And we had to do the IBM one first because they wanted it first. And then I did the Mac one, which was really the most near and dear to my heart. That was what I feel was my first commercial game that I went into Software Etc. at the mall and saw it on the shelf.
Oh, cool.
And that was really cool. I still got it on the shelf in my office here. And I think the Macintosh version of Space Rogue was by far the best. I put so much time and effort into it, and it had gorgeous, 256 color graphics and lots of really nice little Mac UI things, because I was always kind of a UI nerd too. And it was by far the best one. Then I went back, did the Amiga one. I had an Amiga for a while, and I did that version, which was really cranky. The Amiga was an amazing system of hardware, but it was so kind of persnickety. It was a difficult one to work for. And I was glad in the end. I think the company I worked for hired another programmer, and he had to do the Atari ST version, which was good because after 3 ports of it, I was getting pretty tired of the Space Rogue code. But that was cool because it was originally based on Chuck Yeager's Flight Trainer, which Ned Lerner wrote for EA, for Electronic Arts, back in the day on the Apple II. So I got a bunch of this Chuck Yeager's Flight Trainer code that I actually used. It used the same 3D system for flying through space that they used for the flight simulator. So there was a lot of common code that we kind of used pieces of that, because I think they had ported that to the IBM maybe already, and so we got to reuse a little bit of that code. And so I kind of did that, did games for a while. Then I actually did Chuck Yeager's Air Combat for the Mac. That was a game. I don't know if I think it was probably too late. They probably didn't do that for the Apple II. That was probably a PC game. And then basically, I did video games for a good 20 years. Macintosh mostly did ports of just all kinds of games, from Duke Nukem 3D to Tomb Raider, Unreal, Madden 2000, just all kinds of crazy games for years and years. So my hacking and cracking games in assembly language as a kid kind of paid off, and I actually got to do kind of what I wanted to do as a career. So that was kind of cool.
So are you still in the games industry, or have you moved on to other types of software?
I actually kind of left it about 2009. I'd moved up. At that point, I wasn't programming much anymore. I was the director of development for Aspire Media, which is a big Mac game publisher. Done some also console PC games. I worked for them for a while. Kind of burned out, and also at that point, the iPhone came out, and it was kind of fun that the iPhone was a throwback, not to the Apple II, but at least to kind of the early Mac days, in that it was a much simpler system. Like, one programmer could just sit down, come up with an idea, write a game, get it out, put it in the store, And when that happened, I kind of decided I'm going to go back and just kind of be a programmer in a garage kind of thing. And I did iPhone app development for the good first 4 or 5 years of the iPhone and the App Store, and had kind of rode the boom of that and had a good time. Wrote a lot of little kids games, cupcake baking game and decorating, and some little fun stuff like that. It was kind of a neat kind of return to the past of kind of one programmer, one project. As that stuff kind of dried up now, I currently actually am the iOS developer for a little company here in Madison, in Wisconsin, that does a grocery shopping app. So I still code, no games anymore, but it's still code and it's still fun, so I enjoy that.
Yeah, a lot of people have drawn that parallel with early mobile development, that, it sort of harkened back to that one person, one project feel. And it's a shame that we're kind of losing it again, as the mobile projects now are getting really big. But
yeah, and that was one of the reasons I finally kind of left the independent app store, is that just it got to the point where you could no longer be, a developer and just come up with a fun idea and a cool idea and write it really well and put it in the store and sell it. It's like, nope, now you're competing with, somebody who's doing a freemium game that's got a $50 million ad budget and they're running ads during the Super Bowl, or you're up against, Cartoon Network or Electronic Arts, or, somebody who's going to go put, several $1 million or more into development with a big team and a giant art budget and stuff like that. So it kind of went through the same cycles as the rest of the business has. So it's a little too bad that we've kind of lost that again. Maybe there'll be another platform that will come along and let us do that, or maybe I'll just go back and do some more retro stuff. At one point, I actually talked to Paul. I still talk to Paul Neurath every once in a while about getting the rights to Space Rogue, because I wanted to do an iPhone version of it, and I still had the code. I still had the Macintosh code on a disk somewhere, and then somehow it got corrupted and got lost, and I couldn't find the code anymore, and other things happened, and that project never kind of went anywhere, which was kind of a bummer, because I think that would have been a really fun little game to do as a kind of an iPhone iPad game.
Yeah, I would definitely buy it. But yeah, you should try getting back into retro programming. A lot of us do it for that exact reason, because you get that feeling back of, one person can have total control of the machine, and you can do one project all by yourself in a reasonable amount of time. And with the resurgence of retro computing, there's actually people out there that will play it and enjoy it. So you might give that a try.
I think I will have to look into that. Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Mike, do you have any others?
No, I think we pretty much covered it. Thank you very much for joining us today, Glenda.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure. It was a lot of fun, and I'll definitely listen to the podcast in the future, and I'll have to kind of poke around and see what's going on in the old Apple II scene now that maybe it's making a little comeback. It's kind of fun. It definitely was a fun time to kind of reminisce about the old days.
Yeah, you should dig through our old show notes. You might be actually surprised how much has been going on, how much new hardware and software there is, and how many people are doing this again. It's a good kind of survey of the last year or so in our show notes.
Cool. I will definitely check it out.
And in the meantime, we hope maybe we'll see you at Kansas Fest someday.
Okay, I hope so too.
All right. Well, thank you, Glenda, for your time. That was amazing. Mike, I think we got some news, don't we? Yeah, we do. But first, an apology to the good folks over at Call Apple, Bill and Brian.
We actually they released a couple of new books and updated versions, and I think we talked about this last time, but there were some sound quality issues where we had to cut some of the stuff, and so the conversation got cut, but it was still in the show notes. And so I got this email from Brian going, "What happened?" So we're very sorry, guys, and we promise we'll get to those in just a minute. But we actually do have some real news items.
All right, let's roll into that.
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
All right, what do we got, Quinn?
First item is one that I really like. Friend of the show and Kansas Fest regular Dagan Brock has been busy. Those of us who follow the Apple II Enthusiasts Facebook group might be familiar with Bill Buckles, who's been very busy writing graphics converters for Apple II stuff, which is really cool. So you can take like a modern JPEG and view it as a high-res image or double high-res image. It does a lot of sophisticated color remapping and dithering and so on. And so Dagan took it upon himself to write a GUI front end that is cross-platform for those tools. And it's worth it just for the name alone. He named it Buckshot, which is the best possible name for this product. And it's open source, and he's got it all up there. I, for one, am definitely going to be making good use of this if you want. It's fun just to play with modern, images and rendered on an Apple II. But, if you're doing any kind of game and you need a splash screen or whatever, this is a fantastic way to get it.
Yeah. I downloaded this and I've been playing with it for a couple of days now. And it was a lot of fun just to convert, like you said, modern. Look, here's my face on an Apple II again 40 years later.
Yeah.
So it's great stuff.
Yeah, and credit to Bill Buckles. I mean, the conversion is excellent. I'm really quite often surprised how good the images look. Sometimes, you got to stand back 10 feet to get the best effect, You got to let your eyes kind of blur it a little bit because of the resolution and color limits of the Apple II. But, honestly, the conversions are really great.
It's like one of those magic eye posters.
Yeah. Well, it makes you appreciate how much you actually can do with Apple II graphics. We started to see some of that towards the end, like Glenda was talking about Space Rogue and the other Origin games of that era, Knights of Legend and so on. They were really pushing the limits of what you could do with Apple II high res. And you can get that same feel with these modern images converted procedurally.
And I know that Bill has been working very hard on these. If you spend any time over at Comsys Apple II, you can follow all the threads that he's set up, and he's really done a great job of not just creating these things, but making sure that they're bug free and they work well. And now to have this front end on it is just perfect.
Yeah. This is really going to open it up for a lot of people, I think.
Yep.
All right, from software to hardware, the mysterious Korean Ian Kim has been busy again, and this time it looks like he's cloned a MIDI card. I don't know anything about MIDI cards here. Help me out, Mike.
Well, I think the MIDI card just allows you to allows your Apple II to act as a programming interface for, those big synth keyboards that were so popular with bands like Duran Duran in the 80s and things like that. And because when you bought these things, I think at the time, and probably even still now, these were thousands and thousands of dollars, but it wasn't always easy to program them because you didn't have any really good screen and you're sort of limited to the dials and the piano keys. And so somebody, of course, thought of, let's figure out how to interface this with my home computer. And so I can program it by software. And that's what this card allows you to do. You can plug into any musical instrument that has a MIDI interface and theoretically talk to it through this card.
That's cool. I actually had no idea there were MIDI cards for the Apple II, and now we have a modern clone of them, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, back in a few episodes back, we talked to about Joe Eli. He was a Texas musician, and he actually recorded one of his early albums entirely using this process, programming his synth through this Apple II, and he talked about, you know, the frustrations of it would just shut down sometimes because I think he had problems with that machine. But and then he took the record to the label, and they said, we don't know what to do with this. It sounds great, but we can't sell this. And he ended up re-recording it, and then years later, he ended up releasing the original. And you can actually buy that now on iTunes, I think. And the other thing is, over on SoundCloud, there's a guy there's a user called Stynx, Stynx, who has been, he's found a bunch of these old discs that have MIDI songs or other synth interface songs. I think he's got some like Mockingbird stuff, and he's turned them into like radio channels on SoundCloud, so you can just sit and listen to hours and hours of Apple II MIDI music if you want.
Cool. Excellent. And does 8-Bit Weapon use Apple II MIDI at all?
I know that they have for one or two songs. I think for the most part they do the stuff through the Commodore just because the SID chip seems to be better for chiptune stuff. But I know in at least one or two examples, yeah, they have used Apple II stuff. Yeah,
I wonder though if they use the MIDI sequencing at all, because you of course wouldn't need a SID chip or anything for that, but
I don't know. I know that they worked with Michael Mahone to come up with that DMS drum kit thing. There's a program you could buy from them. I don't know if that also has a way to work with MIDI interface. So yeah, we should check that. We should probably have better answers when we ask these questions. Huh?
I shouldn't ask questions that I know neither of us know the answers to. I don't know what I was thinking there. This is terrible radio. I guess at the end of the day, I mean, the MIDI sequencer could be anything. I mean, it could be an Apple II or a modern PC or a toaster because it's just sending, instrument notes and sequence information back and forth to the instruments that are doing the work. So I guess you could use an Apple II for street cred with the retro community, but otherwise, maybe it doesn't matter. Anyway. So this next item, Call Apple magazine for December 2016 is out, and we indirectly wrote an article for them. So my understanding is they borrowed some show notes. Is that what happened?
Well, it was odd. I got an email from Brian Weiser saying, "Thanks for writing this article." And I went, "What?" And he said, "You're probably going what right now?" What he did was he grabbed a couple of the write-ups that I think you primarily do the write-ups for our webpage, and I just copy paste them to all the other social outlets. But they sort of combined one or two of those and made some edits here and there so that it all read as one article, and we're in there. Yay, I think.
Yay. So
yeah, it's available now for download. I think you have to be a member over at Call Apple, which is like $29 a year to get the PDF. And a while back, I think they tried to relaunch this magazine and there was some poor reviews. And so they kind of took a step back, went back to the drawing board and said, "Hey, let's make this better." And this new one has like an article, an interview with Wendell Stander, the creator of the Apple III, but it's about his Apple I project and a lot of other interesting stuff. So if you were waiting, I'd suggest now would be a good time to check it out.
Yeah, there's also an article about Open Apple in there. I assume the check will be in the mail for that.
Exactly. Where's my royalty check?
Well, speaking of Call Apple, the aforementioned books are the next item in the show notes. Should we actually talk about those this time?
Sure, let's do that. We said we were going to, so we shouldn't disappoint them twice. They've of course been working with publishers of the Apple, some of these Apple II books from way back when to get them updated and republished and reformatted in modern formats, and you can buy them now, of course, on their web pages. On their webpage, they had I know they had like one of them was the business wisdom of Mike Harvey from his Nibble editorials, which is really cool. And there's David All, I think AHL, who did a bunch of he did like comics, computer comics, in magazines in the 80s, and that's available as a book. But one of the things that they've also been doing is they've even been updating their current releases. So there's a new edition of the WASPack that they started selling a couple of years ago that now has an intro from Don Williams, who was one of the Call Apple co-founders, and he also so if you're looking for I guess value added content to stuff that you already have, or if you've waited, now would be a good time to get it. And they've also released, they've announced that the Apple Magazine 1979 Compendium is available if you're a member, I think you can buy back issues one at a time, or you can just get this whole thing for the year of 79.
Sweet. All right. Well, we will link to all of that in the show notes for anyone who's interested.
Yeah.
So this next item is a name that many will know from the Apple II Enthusiasts Facebook group and other areas. Jeremy Barhyde, who actually was also mentioned last episode by Alex Lee. He's been scanning Open Apple magazines. Talk to me about this one, Mike.
Over, I think, on Apple2Online.com, there's a complete collection of A2 Central and Open Apple magazines. But I guess the compression was kind of pretty high on them, and I think they have them, locked, like PDF lock, which makes it difficult for if you have Adobe Acrobat, it'll open just fine. But sometimes if you have these alternate readers, they have trouble with PDFs that are password protected. And so he's gone through and rescanned his collection, and it's, I guess, much higher quality. And he's also been scanning Applications, which is an Australian user group newsletter. So, and he'd emailed us about this a little while ago, but it was sort of like, it showed up like right after we finished the recording. And so we haven't been able to really talk about it until now. But if you're, if you love these old magazines, like I think most of us do, you can go download all of those now from his website.
Excellent. All right. WozFest is in the news again here, and so it looks like they had WozFest 5 1/4, which you gotta love that. Now, help me out here, Mike, because I'm afraid I'm gonna choke on this since we always get these wrong. Oz, K-Fest, WozFest. All I know for sure is Australians did some stuff. So maybe you can provide more details.
Yeah, so there are a number of 1 and 2 day and 3 day Apple II fests that apparently take place in Australia and various places that have sprung up over the past couple of years. And every time we talk about it, we get them wrong and we get the emails. So I'm looking at 2 Europlus's webpage right now. It says WozFest 5 1/4, aka Apple Cider. It happened actually on the 20th of November, which I think was right after we finished our last recording, and of course before this one. There's a neat write up there. And I think there's some photo galleries, and they released some new software. Did you see that?
Yeah, they re-released Caverns of Mordia, which is pretty cool.
Have you played that?
I have not. I remember the name, but I don't remember the game itself, actually. That's stretching my memory a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, that's not one that I remember playing at all. But anyway, if you're down in that part of the globe, you should definitely go and check it out and give us a call here on the show and tell us all about it.
Yeah, you'll know because your toilet's going the wrong way and there's a kangaroo punching you.
And we will refer to it by the wrong fest name. So
yeah, exactly. By the way, the toilet thing is a myth, but I just had to throw that out there because it was a joke people would get. Okay, moving right along. This next item I absolutely love. So there's now an archive on YouTube of VHS rips of Apple's late 80s and early 90s corporate training tapes. These things are fantastic. If you want to see a lot of forced smiles and bad 80s hair talking about early Apple computers, this is the archive for you.
Yeah, these are people who are not experienced in reading cue cards.
Yes.
There's no rhythm and very little inflection there. And a lot, you know that Del Yoakum is a great businessman. He ran Apple for a while. He's not good in front of the camera. And you begin to appreciate how great we had it with some of the Steve Jobs' keynotes and things like that. There are a number of albums or playlists. One of them, my favorite, is there's a number of videos from Apple's user group connection. I guess what this was an outreach program in Apple to stay in contact with the registered user groups and keep them updated on what was happening in Apple and where they were planning to go and things. And they would send these videotapes out once a quarter that were just loaded with information and interviews and really boring segments on school stuff and that sort of thing. But some of it was really great. And I think each one of these is, looks like the user group connections are between 45 minutes to like an hour and a half. And there's a promotional section that's like a video about which is better, Mac or Windows. Duh. And there's some technical talks. There's some service training videos, which are actually very good because I think one of them is like how to service your image writer and how to service your laser writer. So And then there's an instructional section, and you have to watch one called A Lighter Look at Holiday Promotion. I think they hired a stand-up comedian who doesn't know or care about Apple at all. And it's a video where she's talking about, it's meant for the retail stores and to introduce a couple of promotions that they can offer in the stores, and I think like a credit program or something. It is bad, bad, bad. So yeah, it's well worth the watch.
Yeah, I don't know if I could watch too many of these, but if you wondered what Apple Computer was like before everybody got media training who might be on camera, then this is what it looks like.
And before there was a YouTube where they could, distribute stuff over the net.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate actually modern WWDC videos where it's real programmers and engineers doing the presentations, but they're all pretty good. And that's the difference is, they make sure all these people have training who are going to be up on a stage talking to people.
They've been rehearsed and things like that.
Yeah.
It's not all bad though. I think I watched a couple of like I said, the user group connection videos, and like at the end of one, there's this really great look at inside the Fremont factory where they're making Macintoshes and 2Cs and the Singapore factory and things. So if that's the history that you're into, it's worth sorting through some of the junk to get to that, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And as you said, there is some actually good technical stuff in there, like, how to service your ImageWriter 2, which is actually quite entirely relevant right now if you have an ImageWriter 2 that's broken. So there's some good, helpful content in there too. Okay, so this next item is relevant to one of my favorite peripherals, the Ethernet 2. For anyone who's not familiar, it's a new version of the card that puts Ethernet in your Apple II. And what's cool about the Ethernet 2 is that it does all of the TCP/IP stack on dedicated chips that are made for this purpose. So it offloads all of that heavy lifting from the Apple II. So the Apple II just has to worry about processing HTML or whatever FTP or whatever you're trying to build. And someone has written an Apple II web server using the power of the Ethernet 2. And what's cool is that it's written in AppleSoft BASIC. So all of the HTTP parsing and so on is all done in AppleSoft. And you can do that because the Ethernet 2 is so awesome. I love seeing this project both because the Ethernet 2 doesn't get enough use, I think, yet. I think it's a really powerful card that's being underused. And I also like it because it showed up on Hackaday, and I always like to see Apple II stuff in more mainstream media outlets.
Sure. Now, they do point out that before you get too excited, this particular web server is not currently accessible across the internet. They're just running it on a local network only, but they've posted the AppleSoft basic source code over on GitHub. So if you want to set it up and let people connect to you, you can do that.
Yes, and you will instantly get slashdotted, I'm sure.
That's right. Yeah, or Hackaday or something.
Yeah, Hackaday, sure. That's a thing, right?
No.
All right, so in addition to the Apple II enthusiasts Facebook group, one of my other favorite groups is the Apple Arcade Game Design. I choke on this every time because it's the name of a book and the name is terrible. But
it's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, it's Apple II Graphics and Arcade Game Design or something. Anyway, we'll link to it. So if you want to join this Facebook group, you can. It's a group dedicated to this one particular book that was really quite good at explaining how to do high-res graphics and arcade games on the Apple II. Started by Michael Packard, and he's kind of been using it as sort of community and sort of just live blogging his progress on developing a game based on the learnings of this book. And the first game he's been working on is called Alien Downpour, and he's made a ton of progress on it. So we'll link to that on the Facebook group. Lots of fun videos on there. And the gameplay might remind you of like Galaxian, something like that. It has a lot of that feel to it. But technically, it's doing some really cool stuff. He's got big, sliding sprites on there. He's got multi-level star field effects, lots of interesting alien behaviors. So if you're interested in getting back to some retro programming like we were just talking to Glenda about, this is a great place to start. He's got all the source code up there and everything too, so you can see how he's doing.
Yeah, this looks like a fun game, and I'm looking forward to being able to play it.
Yeah, and he says he's been developing this into an engine, so he plans to make 4 games, I think he said this year was his goal. Yeah. So he's been, the Facebook group went quiet there for a while because I think he was sort of off kind of refactoring and generalizing the code and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's something I've been watching with interest for sure.
Great.
This next item is a fun one. The title of the article is "The Businesses Apple Left Behind," and it's fun because there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know Apple ever did. So some of it I knew, like we all remember the quick take cameras, and there's some really nice pictures of some of these past products. I guess the hook of the article is that Apple is no longer going to be making monitors, which many of us are quite sad about because I actually quite love Apple monitors. And they're rumored to be discontinuing the Airport, which I am also very sad about because I love all of my Airport products.
I love my little UFO base.
Yeah, and my Time Machine is one of my favorite things in the house. But there are some nice Apple II mentions in here. There's talk of the printers, the image writer, the silent type, the scribe, and the laser writer. And the one that I like is the scanner. I had no idea Apple ever made a scanner. But it's scuzzy and it's styled to maybe look good next to like an Mac II FX, kind of that era, I guess.
Yeah, it looks like you could probably club someone to death with this thing pretty quickly. Just 1 or 2 blows right to the back of the head. It looks like it weighs about 50 pounds. That heavy industrial design that, like you said, was common with the Mac II and the FX and things like that. Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in here. The one that I think that they missed, they're talking about external speakers, and they mentioned the Power CD music player, which just looks awesome. Even if you don't want one of these things, it's pretty cool to look at. But Bose had made the roommate Apple II Apple branded speakers for your Apple II GS that are, I guess, those are a pretty hot item on eBay these days. But those aren't mentioned at all. But other than that, I think they got pretty close. There was no mention of, what was that game console that they made?
The Pippin.
Pippin, yes, that as well. But what's in there is I think this is a good article. It's short and it's an easy read and it's fun.
Yeah, nice pictures. Yeah, the Pippin was a noticeable. Was noticeably missing from this article because that's kind of like the most famous and biggest exit from a market Apple ever did, I think, or failed attempt to enter a market maybe. But the Bose speakers not being mentioned also stuck out to me. Those are, I bet a lot of people don't know those exist because they were pretty rare and they are extremely sought after. People are fighting over them all the time on eBay and the Facebook group and so on.
You can actually get like the exact same model from Bose that they work great on your 2GS, but they don't have the rainbow Apple logo on them that are quite a bit cheaper than the ones with them. So,
Yep. Yeah. And if they don't have the logo on them, then what's the point?
Right. Oh, and they didn't mention the Newton either. Although I guess if we're back into sort of the PDA phone thing, would that be an extension of what they were doing with Newton? So maybe they're not out of that business.
Yeah, I think you could definitely say that the iPod Touch and the iPhone are really what the Newton was trying to be, and I think it's easy to make the argument they're the same market basically. Okay. So yeah,
I'll let you have that one. Sure.
Yeah, and the iPhone is definitely what the Newton should have been. The Newton was about 10 years ahead of its time.
Yep,
maybe 15. All right, so this next item is regarding friend of the show Mike Willeagle's Apple I clones. What's going on here, Mike?
Well, I think Mike is sort of, he's had a lot of fun doing this for, I guess, 7 years. There's a blog post over on his hobby blog where he talks about the details of it. But the big part of why he did it was learning. That was the fun part and exploring and finding out all this information and talking to people who are at Apple. And that's kind of past now for his clones, the Mimeo Apple I clones, and he's decided to hand that whole part of his business over to Corey Cohen, who we've mentioned on this website or on this podcast before. He's the one who Christie's or Sotheby's calls when they need to verify an Apple I or get it working, that sort of thing. So he's definitely right there in the mix, and I can't think of a better guy to take over the business for Mike. Mike is still going to be doing hobby stuff. He's really big into that Selby clone that he's been working on and some other things. But he also mentions that some of the other stuff that he used to sell, like the Apple II, he did a Rev Zero board clone, the Super Proto boards, and a couple of other things, the Dynetics keyboard PCB, or Datanetics keyboards PCB. All of those are no longer available, and he's not going to be making any more. He does still have brain boards and Swift cards, but when those run out, that's it.
Cool. Well, it sounds like the business is in good hands.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to throw my co-host a curveball here and go off our show notes for a couple of items. So, friend of the show, I guess, someone we've talked about a lot anyway, at least, is Blake Patterson over at the Byte Seller.
Mm-hmm.
And he, every year, does this tradition where he goes and watches a bunch of Christmas-themed scene demos this time of year. And so he does a post every year, and he's done one this year. And he does all the retro computers. This particular post has got some Atari stuff. He's actually got an Atari Falcon demo, which is pretty cool. Some C64, BBC, just all over the map. But true to my heart, he has an Apple II GS demo in here. So he's got video of the Polymorph Christmas demo running on the Apple II GS. So I'm going to link to that just because, it's always a good time to watch a 2GS demo, especially if it's holiday themed. Yeah,
Blake's found a lot of interesting stuff over the years. I remember, well, not so recently these days, but he came across like four or five DVDs that someone was selling on eBay, and they were, more of these internal Apple corporate videos and stuff. And he posted all of those up on YouTube, and I'd never seen a lot of that before. And so I always look forward to whatever he's posting. It's great stuff.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And the next item I want to call out is another person we've talked a lot about on the show, one of our favorite Australians. Of course, we have a lot of favorite Australians here on the show, but Alex Lucchesi of the Apple II Projects blog has got a really great post about archiving a previously unarchived game called Convict. And this was an educational title, I believe, probably local to Australia. Yeah, because it's Copyright Department of Education, Queensland. So suffice to say that 4AM probably does not have this disc.
Okay.
And it's a really amazing write-up because the disc is not particularly copy protected, but it is corrupted. And so he manages to recover the corrupted data, and there's a real odyssey that he goes through to do that. A lot of software tools, Copy2+, sector editors, yada, yada. But at one point, he's got a logic analyzer hooked up to the floppy drive.
Oh, wow.
And he busts out the oscilloscope to recover this data. It's fantastic. So if incredibly detailed crack write-ups are too non-technical for you, then this is the article for you, because this is a heroic crack/archive right here, and deserves to be recognized. So thanks for sharing that, and we will definitely link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, this sort of seems a little bit at first like maybe tilting at a windmill, and he's well past the point of where he should have given up, and so now you got to stick it through, and I'm going to beat this thing just because I have to.
Yeah.
But he did a great job, and his write-ups, like other stuff on his blog, the write-up is technical, but it's not going to overwhelm you with binary math and things like that. You should be able to follow on pretty easily. I think at least most hobbyists these days wouldn't be too lost with what he's doing. So.
Yeah, it's a good read, if nothing else, to appreciate the effort. I would have given up somewhere around sentence 3. So yeah, that when he starts getting out the hardware, that's where it gets really amazing. All right, so I think our last item here is some great photos of a very rare Apple II. What's the story here, Mike?
So this is Apple II serial number 0025. Very, very, very early. It's one of the ones that does not have the vent holes in the case. That's how early it is. I actually saw the initial post I came across on Apple Fritter, and he was talking about the username. I think is Mike D or something like that. We'll have that in the show notes. But he got it for free from, I think, a school that was no longer going to use it. And he talks about how everyone made fun of him for picking this thing up and keeping it instead of throwing it away. Well, haha, joke's on them, because he's got this thing, and he found it, I guess, in his closet after so many years, and it he had to do some work on it, but now it boots up, and he's taken some really high-res, beautiful pictures and posted them over on Imager, and you can look at the internals of this thing. So.
Yeah, this thing is fantastic. It's got the ceramic EEPROMs, it's got the 12-volt RAM, it's got the green expansion slots, connectors. It's just, this thing is really, really vintage. It's got the expansion area on the motherboard. The one interesting thing is there's some kind of a modification board in here. Do you know what this thing is? It's called Laser Systems, but not laser as in, the modern VTech clones, but laser with a Z. Do you know what this thing is?
Yeah, I think that's a lowercase mod.
Okay.
Later on, I think they would call it the shift mod. Early Apple IIs and 2 Pluses could not do lowercase without a hardware modification. And one of the great things about some of these older machines is they were owned by enterprising hobbyists who didn't mind getting their hands dirty and going and clipping some wires and sticking things in other places to make it do what they wanted to. So you would often see these weird boards. I think this is serial number 01206. Who knows if they actually made 1,200 of these things. But it's a mod to allow your keyboard to do lowercase.
Yeah, there's a nice picture here of the ceramic Cinertech 6502 with the gold-plated pins. It's just fantastic. I'm sure this machine will be worth quite a few dollars before too long.
Yeah, he took nice pictures, close-up pictures of the RAM chips, and you can see that the date codes match up. This is a great example of a very early machine, and if he ever decides to sell it, it'll go for a ton of money.
It's amazing that it just fell into his lap.
Yeah.
All right, is that the end of our news, Mike?
Yeah, I think it is. Should we move on?
Yeah, let's do a little bit of feedback. It's been a while since we've done that.
Great.
You've listened to us talk. Now it's time to tell us what you think.
All right, the first message I've got is from regular listener and writer, listener Todd, and he wrote in to give us a link to a fun read. Someone has done a series of rankings of Apple II software. So this person crunched the numbers on the rankings of Apple II software as reported in SoftTalk bestseller lists. And so there's just kind of like an overall analysis of all of the rankings of classic Apple II games. And it's an older post. It's from last year, but I hadn't seen it, so it's a great read. The top of the charts are sort of what you would expect: Choplifter, VisiCalc, Apple Writer, Apple Works. But there's some fun surprises in here. Space Eggs did way better overall than I ever realized it would. It's quite high on the list. Raster Blaster, I guess, predictably enough, ranks very, very highly. Number one publishers, he's broken that down as well. Sierra Online, number one. Broderbund, number two. Apple Computer, number three. So, if you're a bit of a data nerd and want to go through, see who really did win on the Apple II, this is a fun read. There's some surprises in here for sure. Microsoft Flight Simulator, you might not realize, is number three. So, lots of fun stuff in here.
Was it still Microsoft back then, or was it SubLogic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, SubLogic Flight Simulator. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like maybe somebody had too much time on their hands. Michael, sorry, I'm kidding. That's really cool. It's fun to see that stuff.
Yeah, because you get little snippets of it, when you read the Soft Talk magazines, like we've been doing here on the show. But to see it all broken down like that's really cool. All right, the next item I have is from listener Rex, who writes and says, "Hi guys," and girl, I assume is implied. Last night, my family and I were watching a pre-recorded episode of Blind Spot, Season 2, Episode 6. I'm not familiar with that show, but he goes on.
That show.
And my son wanted to rewind to see what was on the computer screen, and I suddenly realized there was a book on the shelf that said AppleSoft Basic. Do you guys recognize this book? I did a quick web search and couldn't find a cover that looked like this. And yeah, sure enough, it's a modern scene in a modern office. Everything's modern. But on a file cabinet in the background is front and center an AppleSoft Basic book. Great eye. This is great. It's a little blurry, but you can see, he zooms in for us in the email here, and we'll post this in the show notes so you can all see. There's no mistaking it. I also don't recognize it. It looks like one of those just kind of generic, books that came out by the dozens from the various technical publishers. So I don't recognize it, but we'll link it in the show notes. Maybe one of our listeners has it.
Yeah, it's strange. I'm a big fan of that show, and I didn't catch that at all. And maybe it's because they're sitting they work for the FBI and in a modern setting. So why would that book just be there? Especially like on the end of that, it's sitting on like the top of these file drawers, file cabinets. So these would, you assume, be at least somewhat usable? Because books you don't use end up getting shoved aside and put down lower and buried and this and that. But I imagine somebody in the prop department that, we need books, and they just went in the back and grabbed whatever was there. But my brain is telling me that I remember that cover, but then again, I remembered an Apple IIc photo shoot that never took place, so.
Yeah.
It says Applesoft Basic white lettering. It has kind of the dark green cover and a red apple. And it definitely has that sort of 80s computer book feel to it. So it could, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah. It feels familiar to me too. I feel like I've either seen this book, or it might just be that, it's kind of in the style of those 80s programming books, and they all kind of had a similar look to them. A lot of them had some spoof on Apple on the cover, or a real fruit or whatever. I'd love to know the story behind this. If anyone works on that TV show, we had someone write in about another TV show that we talked about. So who knows? True. Maybe we know someone. But I wonder if maybe some set dresser was an Apple II person, and they were told to go get programming books to put on the shelf so that it looked like a technical kind of office or something. But that's pretty random.
Yeah, unfortunately, the shot it's not ever close enough, and it's too short. It's never really in focus enough to see an author's name or anything like that. So
yeah, you definitely recognize the cover if you saw it, but maybe a Google image search, who knows? It'd be tough to find, maybe.
Yeah, let us know if you know what it is.
All right, moving right along. Listener John writes in to say, hi guys, I was wondering if you could help me to decide which Disc 2 replacement I should buy. One that's available now, ideally, but I can wait if needed. I'd like to stop
for the ages.
Yeah, we talk a lot about this on the show. I'd like to be able to stop using floppy disks, and I want to know what some of the products are available that can boot from DSK images. I'm not sure about, is it possible to access 2 disk images at once, create virtual hard disk images, anything else I should consider? So there's a lot in there. The short answer, I guess, is get whichever one is available now, if you need one now, because most of the time there's 1 or 2 available at any particular time. They vary a lot. I think right now you can buy the SD Floppy 2 from Plamen in Bulgaria, and I think you can still buy the Floppy Emu Model B from Big Mess of Wires. The latter is a big favorite of mine because of the flexibility of it. The SD Floppy 2 is really well regarded for, especially like just playing games real quick, that sort of thing. It's got a really nice form factor. The Floppy Emu is a little bit bulkier. The Floppy Emu has the advantage of working on old Macs as well, if you need that. So yeah, I mean, that's the gist of it. I don't think any of them allow you to access 2 images at once, except maybe, I think, Nishida Radio's Unisdisk. I think the new one, the Unisdisk Air, I think allows you to mount 2 images on 2 virtual floppy drives. But that's the only one I think that can do that. Do you know differently, Mike?
I believe the CFFA 3000 can do that as well.
Right, okay.
That is one of the options that is not currently available. However, Rich is, since we're talking about it, Rich Dreyer, who created the thing, has a few project status updates on his website from August and then October, saying that he's gauging interest for a 5th run. He said the interest level that they need is about 250 people as of October 15th. They're at about 150. And so basically the earliest that they could have these would be November of 2017. And the longer it takes for the list to fill up, the further back, of course, that gets pushed. But I know that the CFFA 3000, I think, is my personal favorite if you don't have to have wireless. Although that Unisdisk Air thing, the wireless is so convenient. But as far as features and price, if you can get it, then I'd look for the CFFA 3000, and then, of course, any of the ones that Quinn mentioned.
Yeah, I think the CFFA, if you have slots, then I think the CFFA is definitely the gold standard. If you don't, if you're on an Apple IIc or IIc Plus, I think, one like the Floppy Emu is a great option, or the Unisdisk Air, if you can get it, is also a great option. The Unisdisk's availability is a bit spotty as well. Nishida Radio kind of goes in waves. Yeah, and sometimes it'll say unavailable on his site, but if you email him, he either has one or will make one for you if he has time. So, all of this stuff is definitely touchy.
And in his case, what he's switched over to is he'll make a batch of 10 or 15 and then announce on Facebook they're going to be on eBay tomorrow. And they sell out immediately. So unless you happen to see that, you're out of luck. But if you want to, he does have a Facebook group. We'll post a link in the show notes. And if you want to sit and watch that, you might be able to get lucky and grab one of those.
Yeah, and I would encourage anyone who's even vaguely interested in the CFFA to please write and get yourself on that list because otherwise, if we don't hit that critical threshold, there will never be any more of them. So we definitely need people to get one more run, at least for those of us who want one and don't have one and have been waiting on the list for a year and a half because you can't quite get to that threshold. Do us all a favor and put yourself on that list. And then even if you're just going to flip it on eBay, then at least, we get them made. All right. Next item I have is from listener Tony. And Tony says, "Hello, OA crew. I've just listened to Open Apple number 63. Hearing about Kate discovering the Apple II community as well as the yearly K-Fest was particularly interesting. Yes, we loved having Kate.
Yeah, she was so great.
She was fantastic. Quinn mentioned she got rid of cable and can't watch Halt and Catch Fire anymore. Given that OA is where I first heard about Halt and Catch Fire, and I'm now a faithful watcher as a result, I feel it is my duty to tell Quinn that she can watch current seasons of HCF on this link, which Tony provides, without having to pay for it. So... this is good news for me and for anyone else who has cut the cable. You can watch the current season on AMC's website, which I didn't actually realize. So I guess that would have been a logical thing to check. It just never occurred to me to just go on there. So, sure enough, you can. And I will be catching up on seasons 2 and 3, which, I guess just season 3, which I haven't seen because I cut the cable. So thanks for that, Tony.
And that goes hand in hand with the news that they've announced the 4th and final season will be taking place next year. So presumably that means we'll get at least a wrap up and not just sort of a season ender cliffhanger. It's good and bad when they announce that shows are going to be ending, after next season.
Yeah.
It's bad because it sucks if you love it, but it's also that gives them an opportunity to wrap things up. So
yeah, I think on balance, I prefer that as opposed to like the Firefly level tragedy where they just leave 20 major plot threads hanging and the show vanishes and everyone's very sad.
Shakes fist.
Yes. Or sometimes you get the Buffy effect where they think the show is ending, so they kill the main character.
Right.
And then they sort out their contract disputes and then they have to resurrect her and do 2 more seasons. So... that happens sometimes, too.
Sort of wish they hadn't.
Yeah. You know what? I actually like those last couple seasons.
Yeah, I guess. But this is not a Buffy show.
This is not a Buffy show. Do not get me started, because I will talk for another hour. All right. Listener Max writes in and says, "Hey, Quinn and Mike, thanks for Open Apple." Well, you're welcome. Aww. Your show is my favorite Apple-related podcast, if not my favorite podcast altogether. And Max says, "Keep them long. The longer the episode, the better as far as I'm concerned. Unfortunately, I don't have my Apple II GS anymore, but I find your podcast fascinating all the same, and will likely pick up a 2C sometime sooner or later. I also discovered Drop 3 Inches recently, and I'm enjoying in that immensely." Aw. Little plug for the Apple III. I guess that's our first Apple III mention. Oh, no, you talked about it earlier.
Oh, no.
With regards. Yeah, all right. You snuck
no
it
escape.
in.
No escape.
All right, well, I think we limited it to 2 at least this episode.
You'll never silence me, ever.
Okay, well, that's all the emails I've got. Do you have any items, Mike, from the Twitter or anything?
I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay, well, great. As always, if people are interested, please do write us at podcast@open-apple.net or feedback@open-apple.net. I don't know why we have 2 different feedback email addresses, but they both work. And
I think one of them got overfilled with spam at one point, so we just sort of But anyway, they both work now. So
yeah, and of course those will get repeated in the bumper at the end of the show. All right, well, I think that wraps us up for December. We will probably in January do our annual roundtable episode, which we normally do in December, but the opportunity to talk to Glenda came along and we just couldn't pass that up. So we decided to do a traditional format show for December. But any closing thoughts, Mike?
Two things. One, if you like what you're listening to and you feel guilty for getting it for free, you can always contribute over at Patreon. We do have a page set up there. Of course, this will always be free and we'll never charge anyone for this, but the money that we do get goes to cover bandwidth costs and things like that. So
Yes.
that's always appreciated. And the other thing is the Soft Talk review this month. We're going to go ahead and bump that to January, but don't worry, it will be back and you can blame Quinn.
Yes, there's a whole story there, but the TLDR is I'm incompetent.
Can't read.
Yeah, and I'll secondarily plug the Patreon. One of the nice things about Open Apple that we pride ourselves on is the audio quality and the fact that we have the full back catalog available at all times. And a lot of the free podcast hosting services don't have those types of things, don't have that level of service, and or require ads or other things to be in the content. So we are all content, we are all free, we are high bandwidth, and we are always going to have the full back catalog. So chip in to the Patreon if you wouldn't mind. We appreciate it.
All right, well,
happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next year.
Have a good one, everybody.
Did I hear you right? Did I hear you saying that you're gonna make a copy of a game without paying? Come on, guys. I thought you knew better. Don't copy that floppy. I'm your MC, double death. DP, that's the disc protector for you and the posse. That's the artists, writers, designers, and programmers that work up the images for games and grammar that let you learn, but also play the game you came here for today. Now I know you love the games, and that's alright to do, because the posse who makes them, they love them too. But if you start stealing, there's no more they can do. You say, I'll just make a copy for me and a friend. Then he'll make one and she'll make one, and where will it end? One leads to another, then 10, then more. And no one buys any discs from the store. So no one gets paid and they can't make more. The posse breaks up and then closes the stores. Don't copy that floppy. So let me break this down for you. No Carmen, San Diego, no more Oregon Trail. Tetris and the others, they're all gonna fail. Not because we want it, but because you're just taking it. Disrespecting all the folks who are making it. The more you take, the less there will be. The disc becomes fewer, the games fall away. The screen starts to shrink and then it will fade. Programs fall through a black hole in space. The computer world becomes bleak and stark. Loses its life and the screen goes to dark. Welcome to the end of the computer age. But I'm much too strong and you're much too smart to let that happen to your chances to explore parts of the new age just behind the doors of your minds. You're the posse of the future and you hold in your brains things never thought of before. And in time, you'll teach us so much more. That's why I'm here and what I'm fighting for. Don't copy that floppy. Now let me introduce you to some of the team. They'll explain a little more about what I mean. You see, on these discs we have frozen in time the creativity of someone's mind. Do you think just because with the flick of a key you can copy that game that the work is free? This creativity we protected by law. We value so highly what the mind's eye saw. Don't copy that floppy. Right thing is really simple for you. The copyright law, it will tell you what to do. Buy one for every computer you use. Anything else is like going to the store, taking the disc and walking out the door. It's called thieving, stealing, taking what's not yours. Is that really where you want your life to go? Think about it. I don't think so. Don't copy. Say you see a game you like and you really want to try it. Don't copy that floppy, just go to the store and buy it. Think of it this way, okay? When you buy a disc, you're saying to the team, we respect what you do and what you're working for. We'll keep up our support so you can make us some more. We'll do the right thing and the future will be clear. There will be new programs year after year. Don't copy that floppy. Now you know how the games and the programs are made and what to do to make sure they're not gonna fade. The bottom line is, it's all up to you. nothing more that I can do. The ball's in your court, dribble, shoot, or pass. I'm sure you'll make your decision with class. Don't copy that floppy. See ya, I'm out of here.
The Homebrew Computer Club, because of its sharing attitude, was very much the opposite of business as usual. It was very much counterculture. It was very much like open source. You give away something, you write it down, other people can look at it, improve on it, come back to you, get some, little amendments made. But, companies did form in the Homebrew Computer Club. I mean, the people that attended the Homebrew Computer Club formed companies to sell products to make money. And then eventually Steve Jobs came by, and we actually started a little company, but not really an official company with big money and boards of directors and that sort of stuff. When we did that later on with the Apple II computer, the day that I left Hewlett-Packard to go to Apple and start Apple, I never went back to the Homebrew Computer Club because now I was in a different world.
There was the sort of famous early letter from Bill Gates, wasn't there, about the software and copying the software? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure. Our computer club got very interested in these upcoming computers, and then it became aware that there was a basic language, a computer language that would run on these small, low-cost computers that you build yourself, and then you have to spend a lot of money to buy enough memory to run a programming language and to buy a teletype to type your stuff on. You have to spend several times the cost of a car, but then you could run. Bill Gates and Paul Allen had written a BASIC, came on a big paper tape reel, and you read it in on a teletype machine. It would get into the memory of the computer, and then it could run programs. You could type in a game out of a book of games written in the BASIC language, type in the game, and play it on the computer. This was a goal of probably every one of the 500 of us in the Homebrew Computer Club, was to get to the point that we could play games on our own computer. And Bill Gates became a little bit famous and well known for this software going around. Well, we had one copy of the tape that our club library had purchased. And one member of the club, Dan Sokol actually, took that tape and borrowed it for 2 weeks. And when he came back, he brought back like 4 copies. He copied the paper tape at his company, AMI. And he brought him back and he said, the new rule is anytime you take something from the club library, you have to return at least that many copies. And it's kind of funny. And we got a letter from Bill Gates all upset, copyright, you're copying software and you shouldn't. And I agree. I agree with that.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback at open-apple.net.
Quinn mentioned she got rid of cable and can't watch Yeah, wow, that's this.
Can't even say it.
Yeah, the warranty ran out on this new mouth. Quinn mentioned she got rid of cable and can't watch *Halt and Catch Fire* anymore.
Such a great blooper.
Jeez. Yeah, that was a dad joke to end all dad jokes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start that over.